All right, let's open up a case file from the Shadow Cabinet's archives. Tonight, we're investigating a really fascinating psychological condition they've cataloged as internal exile. Basically, a prison you build inside your own mind, which can manifest in some pretty wild and sometimes dangerous ways.
So, here's our roadmap. We're going to break this investigation down into 6 key areas. We'll start by mapping out the terrain of this internal state, then we'll analyze 3 very different subjects who embody it, and finally, we'll get to the unifying diagnosis of what's really going on with them.
To really get a handle on internal exile, you first have to understand the landscape. Our investigation kicks off by looking at 2 opposing realms from the case file. One is architectural, the other is psychological, but you'll see they are deeply, deeply connected. And the contrast here is just stark. On one side, you have the sovereign peaks, this realm of blinding light, total transparency, and what the files call right reason. It represents life, potential, what they call the spirit of becoming. And then you have pandemonium. It's described as a Gothic noir masterpiece of pure architectural spite. Think jagged, inverted valleys. It's the physical form of contempt and spiritual ruin.
But here is the absolute key to this whole thing. Pandemonium isn't really a place on a map. The dossier makes it crystal clear that its main inhabitant carries this entire environment inside of him. It's a permanent hell within his own psyche. So it doesn't matter if he's standing in a beautiful garden or a fiery abyss, his internal world is always this static landscape of agony. True exile isn't a place you go, it's a state you're in. Now, our first subject shows us how someone actively builds this prison. This figure doesn't just end up in a prison of the self. Oh no, he actually weaponizes the idea of perfection to construct it, brick by brick. He becomes a guard in his own internal pandemonium.
The file has a name for this entity, the Faustbuch Übermensch. It's a mix of the old Faust legend and Nietzsche's Overman concept. Now, he isn't a specific person, but more like a dark reflection, a rival you create from the fear of your own inner darkness. He absolutely hates growth. His whole goal is to take a living, breathing story and freeze it into a dead, heavy fact. And this really gets to his core motivation. He is the spirit of gravity. Instead of embracing the risky, joyful spirit of becoming, he uses the heavy anchor of past values to drag everything down. He wants to hoard the light of existence in a leaden box, to possess it, not to let it dance and change. Okay, our second subject is a totally different beast. This is a figure that wasn't born from some heavy philosophical concept, but from the very real, practical stress of machines breaking down and the anxieties of the modern world. This part of the investigation gets very specific, historically speaking. You see, the gremlin wasn't born in some ancient forest. It was born in the high-altitude grease and stress of a 1920s cockpit. Royal Air Force pilots, flying these complex and frankly unreliable planes in dangerous places, started talking about these little mechanical imps. By the time World War II rolled around, the gremlin was the universal mascot for anything and everything going wrong.
So why did this happen? Well, the dossier suggests the gremlin was a brilliant psychological defense mechanism. Think about it. Instead of having to face the random, terrifying, indifferent reality that your engine could just fail, you could frame it as a personal fight with a little monster, a flyer's nemesis. It let them externalize that terror, and it helped preserve morale by giving them a scapegoat that wasn't pilot error.
Now, let's go a little deeper. The dossier makes a really interesting distinction between the gremlin as a piece of folklore and what it calls the gremlin spirit, the actual psychological force that the gremlin represents.
So the gremlin spirit's job is to be the uncanny hook. For anyone trapped in the illusion that systems are perfect and logical, it's this violent yank back to reality. It's a reminder that under all that polished steel is a messy, chaotic, unpredictable truth. The file calls it a volatile poison, but also maybe the most honest companion we have in an age of rapid progress. And the dossier lays out a pretty clear process for how this works. First, the grammarian spirit mocks what it calls the logic of zero, this flawed idea that you can calculate away all risk. Then it forces you to collide with the chaos that this logic tries to hide. It shatters that silver mirror of false perfection, and in doing so, it signals the birth of a more honest, if much more terrifying, reality. This brings us to our third and final subject, a man named Salvio Pulido. His ambition? To build a world with no gremlins at all, and in the process,
He created a whole new kind of prison. The file calls Polito the high priest of the polished floor, which is just perfect. His life's goal was to build a gilded cage, a world of absolute certainty where nothing ever went wrong. He wanted to polish a silver mirror of perfection so flawless it reflected only stagnant human arrogance, a world where the terrifying abyss of risk just didn't exist.
So let's map these two prisons side by side. First, we have Pandemonium, the one we started with. This is a prison of ambition. It's built internally from the spiritual wreckage of resentment and spite. It represents the total failure of trying to possess greatness instead of becoming it.
And then you have Salvio Palito's gilded cage. This is a prison of certainty. It's an external cage, built from hubris and fear, designed specifically to lock out the natural chaos of the world. It's all about valuing accumulation, of safety, of static perfection, over the messy, unpredictable process of actually living. But of course, you can't cage the Grimian spirit. It doesn't work that way. The dossier says that from the wreckage of his failed project, Polito himself is transformed. He becomes the Emerald Phantasm, the very ghost he was trying to exorcise. He's now a haunting symbol of systemic failure and the price you pay for denying chaos. So finally, let's tie these figures together. Because the Faustbuch Übermensch and the Emerald Phantasm, even though they came from very different places, are diagnosed by the Shadow Cabinet as suffering from the exact same core problem.
And the file gives this affliction a name, the tragedy of the unowned. It's a spiritual sickness. It's what happens when a person prioritizes accumulation, hoarding safety, power, or static ideas, over the fluid, messy, and risky process of becoming. It is the tragedy of choosing the tiny cage of what you can own over the infinite dance of what you could be.
And here, you can see the two paths laid out, clear as day. The Gremian spirit represents a necessary chaos. It serves transformation precisely because it embraces failure and risk. But the Faustbuch Übermensch and the Emerald Phantasm, they are victims of stagnation. They champion a dead, static perfection. They deny risk, and in the end, they're both crushed by that spirit of gravity they refuse to let go of.
I think the ultimate takeaway from this whole dossier is this. Real freedom, real sovereignty, isn't found by building a cage to protect yourself from the fire of existence. It's found by learning to master the furnace itself. It's about learning to fly with your ghosts, not just building walls and pretending they aren't there. And that leaves us with one final, kind of chilling thought from the archivists. The gremlin was born from the anxieties of the first machine age. Now as we enter a totally new one defined by complex AI and algorithmic black boxes, this investigation feels more relevant than ever. What new gremlins are we accidentally creating in the ghosts of our own code? And will we have the courage to face them when they show up?